Om Shivaya, everyone. Welcome to the 6th webinar on Patanjali Yoga Sutra with Sadhguru. If you have not yet, please open your chat panel and your participants panel, and make sure not to open the Q&A panel. We don't use that. We will turn the microphone now over to Sadhguru.
Om Namah Shivaya, everyone. Welcome to our 6th webinar on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. We're starting it with some verses from the 4th and final chapter. We have about 30 more verses to look at. Last webinar, we looked at the first 11 verses of this chapter. Today, we're continuing with verses 12 through 23. So we'll just go through those verses fairly quickly. After that, we'll continue our comparison of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras to Gurudeva's teachings, which I'm sure you'll find as a much more interesting part. But we do want to become familiar with what's in all the sutras of the Yoga Sutras, so we're going to go through each one, even though some of them are a bit abstract. Chapter 4, verse 12. Past and future as such exist in an object because of the visible difference in the paths of the forms. My comment, normally when we look at an object, we only see its present form. However, it is also possible to see the object's past and future. These forms are manifest or subtle and composed of the gunas. My comment, the past and future may be of a physical or a mental nature. Verse 14, the thatness of an object stems from the homogeneity and the transformations of the gunas. Comment, objects change their form in consistent patterns. Verse 15, in view of the fact that many minds perceive a single object, both belong to separate levels of existence. Comment, this verse is a proof that objects exist independent of the minds that perceive them. Verse 16, the existence of an object is not dependent on observation by a single mind, for if it was, what would happen to that object when that mind did not perceive it? Comment, this verse is also a proof that objects exist independent of the minds that perceive them. Verse 17, an object is known or not known depending on whether or not the mind is colored by it. So uparaga, coloring or influence. So the mind has to be colored by it in order to know it. My comment, though an object's existence is not dependent on a mind observing it, the mind's knowledge of the object depends on whether or not the mind is colored by it. Verse 18, the mental activities are always known by their superior, the Purusha, due to its unchanging nature. Aparinamitvat, unchanging. Comment, though an object's existence is not dependent on a mind wrong one. It is the fact that the Purusha does not change that allows it to perceive the changes that take place in the mind. In other words, if the observer was also changing, it wouldn't be able to objectively see what's being observed. So it has to be stationary or unchanging. Verse 19, the mind is not self-luminous since it is an object of perception. Self-luminous, swa-abhasyam. For the mind to be self-luminous, it would need to be seeing itself, which is not the case. Verse 20, furthermore, the mind cannot perceive both subject and object simultaneously. My comment, this is another argument to prove the mind is not self-luminous. We're almost through these. Verse 21, if the mind were perceived by another mind, this would lead to an infinite regress from cognition to cognition and cause the confusion of memory. Comment, this verse shows the logical impossibility that one mind is perceiving another. Verse 22, when the unchanging awareness assumes the shape of that mind, experience of one's own cognitions becomes possible. So awareness is chit, unchangeable, apratisamkramaya. I'll read that one again. When the unchanging awareness assumes the shape of that mind, experience of one's own cognitions becomes possible. Comment, this verse is showing the source of the consciousness of the buddhi is the Purusha. This and verse 434 are the only two verses to use the term chit for awareness. And the last verse in this section, verse 23, provided that the mind is colored by both the seer awareness and the seen, it can perceive any object. So the mind's in the middle, so to speak. It needs both present. This is developing the idea in the previous verse. Two reflections are necessary to perceive an object, that of the Purusha and that of the object. Okay, we survived that. Congratulations. Moving into the next part, we're going to take some of Patanjali's verses and then compare them to Gurudeva's teachings. So we're starting out with types of mental activities. So mental activities is the translation of chitta vritti. Very important phrase, vritti for activities. What is going on in the mind that we need to restrain or quiet. So here are the verses from Patanjali. Chapter 1, verse 5. There were 5 types of mental activities, of which some are based on wrong cognition and others are not. So we have 5 kinds, and then this wrong cognition and right cognition is klishta, which we'll look at in more detail at another time. We're mainly concerned right now in dividing the vrittis, the activities, into categories. So these are Patanjali's 5 categories. Verse 6, they are correct knowledge, erroneous knowledge, fantasy, sleep, and memory. My comment, this 5-fold division of mental activities provides a useful categorization system for analyzing and subsequently restricting one's thoughts. So the first one is correct knowledge arises from perception, inference, and testimony, pramana. The first source of correct knowledge is that we can perceive something directly and correctly. For example, we see a building on fire. We're perceiving the fire. That's a correct perception. If it was a larger fire, It could be at a distance and we could perceive the smoke. We could infer that there's a fire. This is using inference to obtain correct knowledge. We could also meet someone we trust who tells us that there's a fire over there. We're getting knowledge based upon valid testimony, which is the third source. Verse 8. Erroneous knowledge is false knowledge, not based on what actually is. Viparaya, erroneous knowledge. For example, in a dimly lit street, we see an object and think it is a snake when it is actually a rope. The object exists, but we have misinterpreted its nature. So there's an object, something exists, but we're not understanding correctly what it is. Verse 9. Fantasy derives from verbal statements relying upon a non-existent object, vikalpa. Fantasy. So notice the previous one, there was an object, but we misunderstood what it is. This is talking about an object that doesn't exist. Fantasy. If you have ever visited Disneyland, it has a separate realm called Fantasyland, featuring characters such as Mickey Mouse and Tinkerbell, who are pure make-believe. They are non-existent. Verse 10. Sleep is the activity supported by the presented idea of nothingness. So, of course, this is deep sleep, no dreams. Pratyaya is presented idea, which we won't look at in detail right now. So that's self-evident. And the last one, memory. Verse 11, memory is not forgetting experienced objects. I think that's a great definition. Memory is not forgetting experienced objects. So smriti, of course, is memory. My comment, as many mental activities, vrittis, are the nature of memory, this is an important category to learn, to identify, and restrain. Oh, we have a chance for questions. Do we have any questions on Patanjali's 5 categories of mental activities? This isn't too crucial, but it does help us get used to the idea that vrittis, chitta vritti, mental activities, can be divided into categories, and that categorization can be quite helpful. Any questions? Okay, going on then. Oh, in this case, we're going to look at Gurudeva's teachings in the form of my publisher's desks, which are based on his teachings. Oh, it happens almost every time I talk to someone at a darshan session in the Gurupeetham and they bring up the subject of meditation. Almost always they say the same thing, that when I sit to meditate, I can't control my thoughts. It's so common. In other words, they're not going in very deeply. If you can't control your thoughts, it's not a deep state of meditation. So I have a quote from Gurudeva on that I use in the publisher's desk. How many times have you gone to the temple without being fully there? Part of you is there. Part of you is living in the past. Part of you is trying to live in the future, and there you were. emoting over the things that happen that should never have happened, fearful of things that might happen in the future, which probably won't happen unless you continue being fearful of their happening until you create them. So that last emphasis there is an important point, that what we think about a lot, we actually attract to us. So we want to be sure we are thinking about what we want to have happen to us and what we don't want to have happen, rather than what we don't want to have happen to us. Oh, my pub desk goes on to say, focusing the mind, controlling our thoughts, is clearly central to successful meditation, the point I was making. The fact that Patanjali chose this subject for the first sutra of his yoga affirmations affirms its centrality to the meditative process. Yoga is restraining the mind's activities from taking various forms. Beyond helping us be successful in meditation, a focused mind benefits us in other ways. With a focused mind, we will be more successful in our outer activities at work and at school. Another plus is that a focused mind is a peaceful, contented mind. From that peaceful platform, we can turn within and more easily contact our intuition, our superconscious mind, the inner voice, and benefit from the wisdom and creativity it provides. And then it goes on to give my common comparison. If you're walking with younger children outside, they will see so many more details of the environment than you will. Why is that? Because their intellect isn't that active. But an adult's intellect is quite active, and because of the activity, it actually misses seeing a lot of what's going on around it. So it's a good measure of how much you're able to calm your mind down if you can match the perceptions of the young child. Then the pub desk asks the question, what are some specific techniques we can apply to harness our thoughts? So this is my 5 types of mental activities. It's different than Patanjali's, but it's for the same purpose. It's for the purpose of categorizing our thoughts and therefore being more readily able to restrain them. Often we think about past events because they are not resolved. They are events that we do not fully understand or accept. In handling thoughts about the past, it is helpful to distinguish between recent unresolved events and those that happened some time ago. So there's not just one kind of past event, we're dividing it into 2 kinds, recent and some time ago. So this is our first category of the 5, recent unresolved events. The subconscious mind will for some weeks throw up or present recent events to the conscious mind many times a day. This is a clear indication that an experience is unresolved. It is good, therefore, to act to resolve each experience while this reminding process is going on, rather than to simply wait it out and forget about the happening. So the subconscious mind is trying to help us by reminding us of this unresolved event frequently. It's telling us it's unresolved. It's asking us, shouldn't you resolve this? Don't you want to resolve this? Are you sure just you want to pack it away in the subconscious along with all the other packed away events that are unresolved? So it's trying to help us realize we haven't resolved this. That's why we're remembering it. So therefore, it's good to resolve it. This little icon is for practice. So if we have a page with that, it means there's a practice on it. How do we resolve recent past events? Through apology and forgiveness, the emotional component of the experience can be diffused and the matter resolved. That's a core teaching from Gurudeva. We need to apologize and we need to forgive. And then the emotion goes out of the experience. Second type of mental activities, events that happened some time ago. This is our second category. Unresolved experiences that happened some time ago will also come to mind, but less frequently than recent ones. It is usually no longer appropriate to apologize or seek apology, as the other parties would not understand why we are bringing up the matter after such a long time. So as we know, we have the practice. Write down anything from your past that concerns you and burn the paper, holding the intent that the memory will be neutralized. So distant past events, we use the bodhinatha tantra, writing it down and clearing it out of the mind. It's easy to write it down. It's harder to clear it out of the mind. And the common problem is an inability to forgive someone. A helpful philosophical approach is to focus on the law of karma by affirming that something we did in the past caused those experiences to come to us in the present. So everything that happens to us, we are attracting. There's a big magnet inside of us called our karma, and that attracts everything that happens to us. Of course, that karma can constantly be changed by positive actions in the present, so we're not fatalistic about it. But whatever happens, we're the cause, and the other individual is only the instrument, to bringing the experience to us. We're destined to have that experience. If it wasn't this individual, it would be another individual. If it wasn't this parent in this lifetime, it would be another parent in a future lifetime, because that experience is set to be attracted to us by what we did in our past lives. So if we can actually realize that the person is just the instrument and not the initiator of the action, we are the initiator of the action. That can help us actually forgive something that's difficult to forgive. Well, that's our second type of activity. Our third is going to the future. Worry. We are concerned that certain events may happen, sometimes to the extent of becoming fearful about them. So the practice that Gurudeva gives us to overcome worry is to employ a simple affirmation. When the mind starts to worry, say to yourself, I'm all right now. There's no benefit in worrying. Worrying is just doesn't help the person we're worrying about. It doesn't help us if we're worrying about ourselves. It's just a waste of mental energy. And it's letting the mind be uncontrolled. So better to control the mind with positive affirmations such as I'm all right now. So that's our practice. The fourth type of mental activity is also in the future. It's major decisions. A common practice is to ponder the decision often, but without thinking it through and reaching a conclusion, instead jumping each time to another topic. This is caused by the fact that it's a major decision, and a major decision takes a long time to figure out. You have to analyze the various options, sleep on it, so forth. We have to have enough time to do that. And normally when we start to think about it, we're driving somewhere and all, we have 10 minutes to think about it, and maybe will require 120 minutes to solve it. So therefore we think about it without producing any positive results. We're letting the importance of the decision control our vrittis rather than ourselves controlling the vritti by a specific practice. So what do? The practice. Make a formal appointment with yourself at a time you are free to focus on it fully. For example, 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. If you find yourself mulling it over before then, discipline your mind by affirming, I have an appointment on Saturday to decide this matter, and I won't think about it before then. Making the appointment makes that work, and it's very effective for major decisions and stopping them from just filling up the mind pointlessly before we have time to do that. Fifth and finally, current concerns. When we get the past and the future out of the way, which are the big ones, what's left is pretty minor by comparison, but it's there. It will show up because the mind tends to be active on one thing or another. Current concerns, small stuff. We can concentrate on reducing the miscellaneous thoughts about current concerns, such as plans for the day or the news we saw on TV last night. Our practice, as we know, these are simple thoughts. There's not a lot of emotion in it, past or future. So it's very simple to restrain these kinds of vrittis, mental activities. And we do so by practicing pranayama. That's why after asana, the third step in yoga, we do pranayama. That's why at the beginning of our preparation for meditation, we do pranayama. Pranayama quiets the mind. The breath and the mind are interrelated. The more irregular breathing is, the more irregular our thoughts are. The smoother our breathing, the smoother our thoughts, and the slower our breathing, it also slows our thoughts. And we also balance it in Pingala, which we won't get into, but that's part of the reason we're thinking they're not balanced. So our basic pranayama is to breathe in for 9 counts, hold for 1 count, breathe out for 9 counts, and hold for 1 count, as we know. So what happens? We win the prize when we get all 5 of these types of mental activities, chitta vritti, under control. We're living in a higher state of consciousness. That's what puts us in a higher state of consciousness, is eliminating these 5 kinds of mental activities. So Gurudeva gives this beautiful quote. The mind lives in the past, and the mind tries to live in the future. But when you quiet your mind, you live in the present. You are living within your soul, or the higher state of your mind, which is undisturbed by the things of time. Isn't that beautiful? Living within your soul, which is undisturbed by the things of time. We can add to the eternal now the concept of the mountaintop perspective. When we're in the eternal now, it's like being on top of a mountain, looking down from a great distance. So it's, as the text says, it's being able to see the forest instead of the trees. We see the overall pattern instead of individual events. And this can apply to our own life, as if we were on top of a mountain and looking down upon our own life. We can see the patterns of our life more clearly rather than the individual experiences, just because we're in the eternal now. We can see some of our habits that we might want to improve. So first example, the habit of making a decision to pursue a project, but then giving it up when the first major obstacle is encountered. So that's not a good habit. Second example, the tendency to make resolves to increase our spiritual practices, our sadhanas, but then relinquishing our commitment after spending time with non-religious friends. Also, when we're in the eternal now, we can more easily contact the spiritual power of the spine, which of course is not physical, it's a spiritual energy. You can't see it scientifically. The ability to turn within and feel the spiritual power within the spine. There is a dynamic force there that, when experienced, gives us renewed inspiration and positiveness. So it's easy to run out of inspiration and positiveness by all the challenges we face in life. Some people rely on others to recharge them. But the strongest people rely on the power in the spine to recharge themselves. So that's when one is really a spiritual person, when you have the power to recharge yourself. So first we get into the eternal now, and then through meditation, we feel the spiritual energy in the spine, and that gives us our renewed inspiration and positiveness. And here's a quote from Gurudeva to describe all of that. Can you visualize yourself right at this instant, balanced on the top of a tall tree? Here you live in the eternal now, with great awareness of what is around you and within you, but with no thought on it. Okay, this may be material. It's going to generate some questions. So we do have any questions on the 5 categories of mental activities presented in the publisher's desk, or on the concept of the eternal now? Okay, still no questions. Going into a new topic from Patanjali. Well, we talked about yoga is the restraint of mental activities, chitta vritti, and one aspect of restraining these activities successfully is categorizing the chitta vritti. So in my system, we have 2 in the past, 2 in the future, 1 in the present, 5 categories of thought. Each has a different practice. So that helps us restrain them. Now we're coming into another area, another aspect of restraining mental activities. So verse 12, the restraint of these activities is achieved through practice and dispassion. So we had categorization, now we're adding practice and dispassion. Abhyasa, practice, vairagya, dispassion, freedom from passion. Well, practice is the common one, and I stress it often, talk about what makes someone a good dancer, and you become a good dancer by reading books, by attending lectures, and everybody always says, no, you have to practice. Well, practice is the more obvious of the two. But Patanjali is also saying there's another component, which is dispassion. In other words, the reason many of these mental activities are occurring is because of our attraction towards something or someone. So a lot of passion stimulates a lot of mental activity. The more dispassionate we are, then that naturally reduces mental activity. Definition of practice. Verse 13, practice is the exertion to achieve steadiness in the state of restraint. My comment is this verse is defining what we're trying to do. The point of yoga is to sit with a controlled mind without losing control. You want to achieve steadiness. Practice is the effort to achieve that. So steadiness means you can quiet the mind and hold it quiet successfully for some time, say 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You have the ability to hold it quiet for more than 15 seconds, 30 seconds. So steadiness is that idea of a longer time of minutes. 14, this practice becomes firmly rooted when it is cultivated properly and uninterruptedly for a long time. So it gets easier. That's what it's saying. Just in practicing it properly and uninterruptedly, we get better at it. We naturally improve in our ability to restrain mental activity through properly practicing and regularly practicing. It just gets easier. Verse 15, dispassion can be recognized to have been mastered by those who have no desire for what is seen or heard about. My comment, progress in yoga is not possible if our mind is constantly externalized by objects or people to whom it is strongly attracted, whether actually seen or simply heard about. So we have to control that which we are passionate about. So now we get supreme. In verse 16, the non-thirsting for the gunas, which arises when the Purusha realizes its own nature, is the supreme state of dispassion. My comment is, when the spiritual awakening takes place of the Purusha experiencing its own nature, there's a natural loss of interest in all of Prakriti's manifestations. This is called para vairagya, the supreme state of dispassion. In other words, we find what's inside of us to be more fulfilling, the experience of what's inside of us to be more fulfilling than the experience of what's outside of us. That's the idea. The Purusha is enjoying its own nature more than it enjoys external things. It's a natural phenomenon when we are experiencing the Purusha in a profound way. Moving on, practice and dispassion and transformation. I wrote something about that a few years ago, which I ran into this morning. I thought I'd share that. Many years ago, we were visited by Dr. Sheshagiri Rao, editor of the Encyclopedia of Hinduism, who, in discussing this project with the editorial staff of Hinduism Today magazine, made the insightful comment that Hinduism not only informs, but also transforms. A nice phrase he created there. In other words, we're not trying to just acquire knowledge, not trying to just become informed. We're also trying to utilize that knowledge to change ourselves or transform. It's clearly a two-step process. We acquire knowledge, and then we put it into practice. Well, knowledge is important. If Hinduism is practiced with inadequate knowledge, it easily picks up some superstition. So we need to know why we're doing what we're doing and what the result is it's supposed to produce. Then we're knowledgeable and putting that knowledge into practice, and that practice will be proper. And if it's done steadily, then it produces transformation, or our ability to control the chitta vritti becomes easier. Gurudeva on the idea of transformation. Gurudeva himself often describes Saiva Siddhanta as the path of personal spiritual transformation. So what causes this transformation to take place? Transformation comes from an individual performing spiritual disciplines regularly. This practice is called sadhana, and one following it is on the sadhana marga. Sadhana. Gurudeva gave this explanation of sadhana. Sadhana is performing the same discipline over and over and over again. So the core sadhana in Gurudeva's teachings is definitely the daily vigil. So that's our key practice, which causes us to make progress. This is the sutra that describes the daily vigil. Sutra 21. Worshippers of Shiva perform a 1-hour daily vigil, ideally before sunrise, in a clear, quiet place, after bathing and donning fresh clothing and holy ash. This vigil is optional on weekends and when traveling or ill. Clearly, that's for the serious seeker. Lots of Hindus are not willing to commit to an hour a day vigil first thing in the morning. It means you have to go to bed early, get up early, be regular in this activity, set aside other activities to give it preference. But it is what makes the members, Shishya, make progress, is our daily vigil. Same thing in the monastery. We have our daily vigil. It's a different pattern. As you know, we have our group vigil is 5:30 to 7:30 roughly, 2 hours. We have half an hour Shiva Puja, some chanting, hour meditation, a little more chanting. And that takes about 2 hours that we do in this same pattern. We don't do it on retreats. And then individual monks do additional sadhana privately during the day at different times. But that's our group practice. So it's a practice both for the grahastas and the monks, a daily vigil, very important. And the vigil content for the Shishya, Sutra 22, worshippers of Shiva during their daily sadhana vigil conduct or attend puja, chant the Guru mantra and 108 repetitions of their mantra, study scripture and perform hatha yoga, concentration, and meditation. A little bit more on dispassion. We have a nice definition in our online lexicon. So this is the definition of raga, or passion. That which enraptures. In the structure of melody in Indian music, a specific collection of sounds or notes. Raga is similar to scale in Western notation, but raga includes the unique emotional or mystical mood created when the melody is heard. Raga, while being a musical term, means much more. It is desire, passion, attraction for any object, person, position, attainment. Man's life revolves on raga, desire. Man's bondage is because of raga. Scriptures teach man to have raga, but make the object of raga divine and spiritual. When man develops deep dispassion to what could bind him and turns his attention to desire that which will free him from bondage, that is salvation. Raga for the worldly objects is denounced by Scripture. Raga for Atman, God, Brahman, Ishvara is called mumukshutvam, moksha, icha, desire for liberation. And we have Gurudeva's comment on this. I'll read the fuller quote. Desire, fulfillment, pleasure, loss, pain, suffering. That is the cycle of seeking happiness in outer things, be they possessions or people. What is the solution? Some say give up desire. Do you know anyone who's been successful in giving up desire? I'm sure you don't, because it's not really possible. And Gurudev goes on to explain why. Desire is what is causing the whole problem. It drives us to get what we want. And when the happiness of that getting eventually wears off, we start all over again with a new desire. So if you can get rid of desire, you solve the whole problem, right? Gurudeva looked at it differently. He said, desire is life. And the reason we desire things is because we are alive. Desire is energy expressing itself. The only way you could get rid of desire would be to get rid of life. However, even if the physical body is passed on, even if we don't have a physical body, we are still alive. Still active, creative, and motivated by what? Desire. So trying to get rid of desire is not really a solution to the cycle of desire and fulfillment. Instead, Gurudeva suggested uplifting our consciousness and changing what we desire. That is how we solve the problem. By channeling or transmuting our energy, desiring things that are more refined. Well, that's Gurudeva's approach to becoming dispassionate. It's not to give up desire, rather is to gradually focus our desire on more and more refined things, more spiritual, more cultural activities, and drop off the more worldly, the grosser objects and activities that we previously desired. So it's a gradual refining process, redirecting desire towards spiritual and cultural refinements. And then we don't find our thoughts pulled out toward an object we have strong desire for when we're trying to meditate. Okay, do we have any questions? That was our last slide for this webinar. So the questions can be very general. We still have a few minutes left. I include enough time for some questions, so we have a little time left over if we have any. Okay, looks like we don't have any questions today. Sarvanath Swami, can you confirm that you're not aware of any questions?
So if we could just make sure, if anyone was trying to ask a question, we don't see your note in the chat window, so that's one thing we wanted to check.
Okay, we've got a thank you. That's appreciated. Getting a lot of thank yous. Okay. Well, very good. Then I'll just recap. We have a couple of minutes left in our hour. The first part was pretty technical and not really that important, but it's good to know that it's in there in case you ever want to find it. It's at the beginning of chapter 4 about the mind and objects and transformations and perceptions. And then we were looking at yoga, of course, is restraining mental activity. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. And we have approached it by saying we can effectively restrain mental activity by categorizing our thoughts. Patanjali has a fivefold system, and I gave an alternate fivefold system, which I find more useful in our approach of recent past, distant past, worries about the future, major decisions about the future, minor details about the present, and then ending up in the eternal now, and then enjoying and using that state because we're not engaged in those 5 categories of thought. Then we looked at Patanjali's idea that just by proper and regular practice, we get better. So that's encouraging. It's like other things where practice actually helps you significantly improve. So we're impressing the mind, and every time we do so, every time we control it, and if we do so consistently, without long breaks of time between them, such as our daily vigil 5 out of 7 days, except when traveling, we'll get better at it just through practice. And then the last idea was passion and dispassion. That our passion or attraction to objects and people can pull us out or stimulate our thoughts excessively. So we have to be very careful what we're attached to. And we can't give up attachment because attachment is desire and desire is life, and we're always alive. We have to merge with Shiva to give up our individual life, and that's a ways away. Well, that's not even needed to be thought about. We just need to refine what we desire. Refine our desires, and refined desires don't pull us out of meditation or don't generate as many chitta vritti as grosser desires do. So those are 3 types of practice that will cause us to improve in controlling the mind. So thank you very much. Om Namah Shivaya.